John Marsden had spent years fighting wars that no one remembered. Now he lived paycheck to paycheck, fixing outdated hover engines in the back end of a greasy mechanic's shop on a rundown colony station. The government barely acknowledged veterans like him. There were no grand rewards, no generous pensions, just long nights, aching bones, and the slow realization that the universe had moved on without him. So when a courier in an official royal uniform knocked on his rusted apartment door, John assumed they had the wrong guy. John Marsden? The man eyed him with barely disguised skepticism, glancing at John's oil-stained work jacket and unshaven face. John leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Who's asking?" The courier handed him a sealed hollow scroll, the kind used only for royal decrees. "The late Prince Kalor of Venkar has left you an inheritance." John blinked. Prince Kalor. The name rattled around in his brain like a loose bullet. He remembered the man, barely. A diplomatic mission gone wrong, an ambush in a no-name sector, a prince bleeding out in his arms while explosions rattled the sky. John had saved him, shoved him onto an evac ship, then limped back to his squad. That was years ago. Kalor was dead now? John looked at the glowing scroll in his hands, heart thudding. What kind of inheritance? The courier hesitated, then gestured to the docking bay below. John followed his gaze and saw it, a massive containment crate being unloaded by 4 nervous-looking workers. The crate shuddered as something inside shifted, a deep, low growl vibrating through the air. The courier cleared his throat. "An albino Lupiran wolf, sir." John's breath caught. A Lupiran wolf. The elite alien species known for their intelligence, their telepathic abilities, their deadly precision in war. These weren't pets. They weren't even considered animals by most of the galaxy. They were warriors, royal guardians. And this one had belonged to Prince Kalor. John narrowed his eyes. Why the hell would he leave me a war wolf? The courier took a step back, as if the answer might bite him. "That, I cannot say, but the royal decree is clear. It belongs to you now." John turned his gaze back to the crate. The creature inside growled again, but not in fear. It was the growl of something waiting, something watching, and somehow, John knew this was only the beginning. The docking bay was eerily silent as the crate hissed open, releasing a burst of cold air from the containment field. Workers scattered, keeping their distance, their hands hovering over tranquilizer weapons as if expecting violence. John stood his ground, and then the wolf stepped forward. It was huge, at least 6 feet tall at the shoulder, with a sleek, muscular frame built for speed and power. Its fur was pure white, so bright it almost glowed under the station's lights. Its eyes, stormy gray, too intelligent, too knowing, locked onto John instantly. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a voice as smooth and articulate as any diplomat, the wolf spoke. "So," the creature mused, tilting its head slightly, "you're the one he chose." John froze. Every survival instinct he had from years of war screamed at him. He had seen a lot of things. Aliens with tentacles, AI implants that could steal a man's mind, parasites that hollowed out bodies and wore them like puppets. But a talking Lupiran wolf? That was new. John exhaled slowly, keeping his face blank. "You can talk." The wolf's expression didn't change, but there was a trace of amusement in his voice. "I was wondering when you'd figure that out." John ran a hand down his face. "Right? Of course. Talking space wolf. Because why not?" The wolf sighed, stepping fully out of the crate, stretching his long limbs like he had just awoken from a deep sleep. "If it helps, you look just as confused as I expected." John watched as the wolf moved with predatory grace, its tail flicking behind it as it surveyed its new surroundings. It showed no fear, no hesitation, just quiet observation, as if it were measuring everything around it. Finally, John cleared his throat. "You got a name? Or do I just call you Wolf?" The creature's silver eyes flicked back to him. "Lyric." John took that in, nodding slowly. "All right, Lyric, mind telling me why a dead prince left me a talking alien wolf?" Lyric tilted his head, considering the question. Then, with deliberate slowness, he stepped closer, his gaze locked onto John's. "I belong to you now," Lyric said, voice quiet but unshakably certain. "Because Kalor trusted you with something the rest of the galaxy would fear." John's fingers twitched toward the sidearm at his belt, not in aggression, just instinct. "And what exactly is that?" he asked carefully. Lyric's eyes darkened. "My existence," he said. John's stomach tightened. This wasn't just some pet. wasn't just an inheritance. This was something bigger, something dangerous, and someone out there wouldn't want Lyric to be free. John took a slow breath. "Well," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, "guess I better figure out what the hell I just got myself into." Lyric huffed in amusement. That would be wise. John didn't know whether to laugh or run. Instead, he held out his hand. Lyric hesitated, just for a moment. Then he reached out, placing a massive clawed paw into John's palm. A silent agreement, a deal with no way out. John knew, deep down, that his life had just changed forever, and for some reason he wasn't sure whether to be terrified or relieved. John wasn't sure what to do with Lyric. For one, a massive albino talking wolf wasn't exactly something you could walk around with unnoticed, especially in a colony station where everyone gossiped. Even now, as they moved through the narrow corridors toward John's apartment, he could feel the stares, the way people paused mid-conversation, the way their eyes widened before they whispered to each other. Lyric, of course, seemed completely unbothered. The wolf moved fluidly, his silver eyes flicking between people with quiet interest, but never lingering. He walked beside John with deliberate ease, like he belonged here, like he'd always belonged anywhere he chose to be. "Is there a reason you're not freaking out?" John muttered under his breath, keeping his hands stuffed in his pockets. Lyric glanced at him, his ears twitching. "Would that be useful?" John sighed. "You're a giant talking wolf, Lyric. Most creatures like you don't exist outside horror stories or war manuals." Lyric hummed and thought, "You fear what you do not understand. It is a common flaw of your species." John shot him a look. "Flaw?" Lyric's tail flicked slightly. "An observation." John rubbed his face, wondering if this was what insanity felt like. He had spent years trying to get away from war, from missions, from responsibility, and now a royal alien wolf was casually psychoanalyzing him in public. They finally reached the entrance to his small apartment. John pressed his hand to the scanner, and the door hissed open. He stepped inside first, glancing back as Lyric followed, his fur practically glowing in the dim lighting. The door sealed shut behind them. John let out a breath and turned to face his new companion? Asset? Curse? He wasn't sure yet. Lyric moved slowly through the room, his head tilting slightly as he took in the surroundings. The apartment was small, one main living space, a kitchenette, a single bed tucked in the corner, but it was functional. Nothing fancy, but John never needed fancy. Lyric stopped near the window, his reflection ghostly pale against the glass. "You live alone," he noted. John scoffed, tossing his jacket over a chair. "What gave it away?" Lyric turned toward him, his gaze unreadable. "No scent of others. No disturbances in your space. You do not expect visitors." John leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I don't like people in my business." Lyric considered that. "Then you must find my presence very inconvenient." John exhaled through his nose. "You have no idea." Silence stretched between them. John could feel Lyric studying him, like the wolf was peeling him apart, reading every thought before he had time to process it himself. Then, finally, Lyric spoke. "You do not trust me." John didn't answer right away. He just stared at the wolf, the creature that shouldn't exist, the being that shouldn't be his problem, and shrugged. "I don't trust anyone." Lyric gave the smallest nod, as if that made sense to him, as if that was expected. "Good," the wolf murmured. "Neither do I." For some reason that unsettled John more than anything else. John woke to the sound of low growling. His instincts kicked in immediately. His hand shot toward the knife under his pillow, his body tense and ready to strike. But as he scanned the dark room, he realized the growling wasn't directed at him. Lyric was at the window, his massive form partially silhouetted against the neon lights outside. His fur bristled, his muscles coiled tight like a wound spring, his silver eyes locked onto something beyond the glass. John pushed himself up. "What is it?" Lyric's ears flicked back slightly. "We are being watched." John felt ice crawl up his spine. He swung his legs off the bed and moved cautiously toward the window. At first, he didn't see anything, just the usual flow of late-night foot traffic in the station's lower levels. Then he noticed it. A figure, too still, too quiet, standing near the end of the alley below. The man was cloaked, his face hidden beneath a low hood, but John knew a professional when he saw one. This wasn't a random bystander. "Damn," John muttered, jaw tightening. Lyric didn't move from his position. "You recognize them?" John's fingers twitched. Not specifically, but I've seen their type before. Lyric's tail flicked slightly. Hunter? John nodded. Or worse. Whoever they weren't amateurs. The way they stood, the way they didn't fidget or glance around nervously, it meant they were trained. Waiting. Observing. John's stomach twisted. This isn't some random merc looking for work, he muttered. Someone put a tail on us. Lyric's growl deepened. Then they know what I am. John did not like that. He turned away from the window, already running through possible exit strategies in his head. If someone wanted Lyric, that meant this inheritance was a lot more complicated than a royal favor. John never trusted coincidences, and right now, too many things weren't adding up. Lyric finally pulled away from the window, shaking out his fur with quiet tension. We should leave, he said, his voice calm, steady, dangerous. John exhaled sharply. Yeah, he muttered, grabbing his jacket, we should. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. Someone wanted Lyric back, and John wasn't about to let them take him. John moved through the dimly lit corridors of the station, his steps steady, controlled, but his mind running a mile a minute. He could still feel the weight of the figure's gaze from earlier, still sense the danger coiling around them like an unseen noose. Beside him, Lyric kept pace effortlessly. The wolf's massive frame drew more than a few wary glances, but no one dared to stop them. Lyric moved like a predator, his silver eyes flicking toward every darkened corner, every shift in the shadows. John didn't need to ask. Lyric had already sensed what he had. They weren't alone. You sure about this? John muttered under his breath. Lyric didn't turn his head, but his ears flicked slightly. About what? Leaving without a plan. Lyric huffed. I thought you preferred action over hesitation. John shot him a look. I prefer not walking into an ambush blind. The wolf exhaled slowly, his gaze never wavering. Then keep your eyes open, because it has already begun. John didn't like that answer. He scanned the streets, feeling the air tighten around them. The station was alive, neon lights flickering, people moving, voices blending into a dull roar of everyday existence. But beneath it, something else simmered. The weight of unseen eyes. The slight hesitation in the movements of those passing by. The feeling that someone, somewhere, was just waiting for the right moment to strike. John reached for his sidearm. Then the first shot rang out. A crack of plasma fire split the air. John reacted instantly, diving behind a stack of metal crates as the spot where he'd been standing exploded in a burst of molten slag. Lyric moved faster than anything that size had a right to move. The wolf twisted midair, his body a blur of white and silver as another shot sizzled past, missing him by inches. He hit the ground running, launching himself into the shadows of a nearby alley before their attackers could adjust their aim. John pressed his back against the crate, cursing under his breath. They weren't dealing with some amateur bounty hunter. These guys had precision, military training. They knew who they were chasing. A voice crackled over a comm system, distorted but clear. Target is moving. Engage. Hell. John barely had time to brace before the next volley came. He turned, firing 3 quick shots toward the source of the attack. One of them hit something solid. A grunt-like noise confirmed it, but the others went wide. He didn't stay to check his work. Lyric, he barked, already moving. The wolf emerged from the darkness, his silver eyes gleaming like a blade in the low light. No blood on his fur, no hesitation in his step. We have 2 choices, Lyric said, voice eerily calm despite the chaos. We fight, or we run. John didn't hesitate. We run. And just like that, they were moving again, disappearing into the winding maze of the station as their hunters closed in. John's lungs burned as he sprinted through the lower levels of the station, the air thick with the stench of oil, rust, and desperation. The underbelly of the colony was where the unwanted gathered. Smugglers, outcasts, people looking to disappear. Right now, he and Lyric fit right in. Behind them, the sound of heavy boots and shifting armor echoed through the steel corridors. Their pursuers were fast, but they didn't know this part of the station like John did. He had spent years running jobs through these tunnels, sneaking past patrols, making exits where none should have existed. Lyric ran beside him, his breathing controlled, his movements as fluid as a ghost slipping through the dark. They are tracking us, the wolf said. John didn't slow. How? Their leader. He is Luperon. John's stomach dropped. A Luperon tracker. That explained a lot. These weren't just mercenaries. They had someone who could smell them out, predict their movements. "We need to break the trail," Lyric continued, voice measured. "Now." John made a split-second decision, grabbing Lyric's thick fur and yanking him into a side tunnel just as another round of plasma fire erupted behind them. The shots missed, but only barely. They ran through the narrow passage, moving fast, ducking under rusted pipes and weaving between old storage crates. The air felt heavier here, charged with the hum of power generators buried deep within the station. Lyric suddenly stopped. John skidded to a halt beside him, chest heaving. "What?" The wolf's ears twitched. He turned his head slightly, sniffing the air. Then his lips curled back, revealing sharp, gleaming teeth. "They are already here." John's fingers curled around the grip of his pistol as the shadows ahead shifted. And then they stepped out. 3 figures, clad in dark, plated armor, their helmets sleek and reflective, their weapons leveled with practiced precision. But it was the one in the center that caught John's attention. The Lupiron tracker. He was massive, taller than Lyric, his fur a deep shade of charcoal black. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Lyric immediately, his expression unreadable. "Brother," the Lupiran said, voice smooth as a knife's edge. John felt Lyric tense beside him. The black-furred Lupiran took a step forward. "You were supposed to die with Kalor." Lyric's tail flicked once. "And yet, here I stand." The tracker tilted his head slightly. "Not for long." John didn't wait for the conversation to end. He fired first. The shot slammed into the Lupiran's armor, but the bastard barely flinched. In the same instant, the other mercs moved, their rifles flaring to life. Lyric exploded forward, his speed inhuman, his body a blur as he collided with the nearest attacker, teeth sinking into armor, claws raking against reinforced plating. John ducked low, firing into the second merc's visor, sending them staggering back as sparks erupted from the impact. The black-furred Lupiran was on him in seconds. John barely had time to react before a powerful strike caught him across the chest, knocking him flat against the steel floor. Pain lanced through his ribs. The Lupiran loomed over him, golden eyes gleaming. "You are weak," John coughed, wincing. "Yeah? And you talk too much." A white blur crashed into the black Lupiran from the side. Lyric hit him hard, teeth flashing, claws digging into thick fur, driving the larger wolf back into the darkness. John pushed himself up, ignoring the burning pain in his chest. Lyric was holding his own, but the black Lupiran was stronger. Faster. If they didn't end this fight soon, they wouldn't get another chance. John clenched his teeth. He had one shot at this. He grabbed the discarded rifle from the fallen merc, powered it up, and aimed at the ceiling. One well-placed shot. He pulled the trigger. The entire corridor shook as the support beam ruptured, sending tons of steel crashing down. The black Lupiran snarled, leaping back just in time to avoid being crushed. But the distraction was enough. "Lyric, move," John shouted. The white wolf twisted away, bounding toward John as debris collapsed between them and their pursuers. John didn't wait to see if the Lupiran survived. He grabbed Lyric's fur, pulling him into another tunnel, and they ran. They were not safe yet, but they were alive, and right now, that was all that mattered. John's breath came in sharp, measured bursts as he and Lyric slipped into the underbelly of the station, weaving through the tangled mess of old machinery and abandoned corridors. The steel walls around them were rusted and corroded, humming with the remnants of forgotten power grids. The dim emergency lights flickered in irregular pulses, casting jagged shadows along the floor. They had bought themselves a moment, nothing more. John leaned against a bulkhead, wiping the sweat from his brow. His ribs ached like hell, but he had learned long ago how to push through pain. Lyric stood beside him, his massive form still tense, ears flicking at every distant sound. He was listening, waiting, hunting. The black-furred Lupiran was still out there, and he wasn't alone. John exhaled, his voice low. "Who the hell was that?" Lyric didn't answer at first. His silver eyes remained fixed on the corridor ahead, his tail swishing slightly as if caught in deep thought. Then, after a long moment, he spoke. "Kairos," he murmured. The name came with weight as if it carried the echoes of something long buried. John frowned. "Friend of yours?" Lyric's jaw tightened. "No." Something in his tone made John's stomach twist. He had heard hatred before, in war, in dying men's last words, in the sharp edges of voices that had seen too much. This was different. This was personal. John rolled his shoulder, wincing at the dull pain still radiating through his side. Well, Kairos looked pretty damn invested in putting you down. Lyric let out a slow breath, his silver eyes flickering. He was one of Kaelor's warhounds, an enforcer, trained to be stronger, faster, more ruthless than the rest of us. I was created to be a symbol of diplomacy. He was designed for war. John shook his head. Great, so we've got a super soldier wolf on our ass. Lyric's lips curled slightly, though the amusement in his voice was bitter, essentially. John rubbed his temples. And let me guess, he's not the type to just give up and walk away? Lyric exhaled. Not while I'm still breathing. John swore under his breath. He could feel it, the tension closing in, the weight of inevitability. They could keep running, keep hiding, but sooner or later, Kairos would find them again. And next time, there might not be a collapsing ceiling to save them. They had to end this. John turned to Lyric, his expression set. Then we stopped running. Lyric's ears perked, his silver gaze searching John's face. You mean to fight? John nodded. Yeah, I do. For the first time, Lyric truly smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. Then we should choose our battlefield. John grinned despite himself. You got somewhere in mind? Lyric's tail flicked. I do. And just like that, they stopped being prey. The station's old shipyards were abandoned years ago, forgotten relics of a once thriving industry, now left to decay beneath the artificial sky of the lower decks. Twisted metal towers reached toward the ceiling, casting jagged shadows across the cracked ground. The air was thick with the scent of rust and ozone. It was the perfect place for an ambush. John crouched behind an old maintenance console, his pulse steady despite the storm he knew was coming. Lyric stood beside him, his body coiled, ready, his silver eyes locked onto the entrance ahead. They didn't have to wait long. Footsteps, heavy, precise, unrushed. Then the voice, smooth, cold. I expected you to keep running, little brother. John's jaw clenched as Kairos stepped into view, his black fur blending into the shadows, his golden eyes glowing like molten fire. He moved with absolute confidence, his shoulders squared, his claws clicking against the metal floor. Behind him, two mercenaries flanked his sides, their rifles trained forward. John exhaled. You're late, Kairos smirked. And you're outmatched. Lyric didn't flinch. You always did overestimate yourself. Kairos chuckled. And you always did think you were different. His gaze flicked to John, amusement curling at the edges of his lips. I see you've picked up a pet. John smiled tightly. Funny. I was just about to say the same about you. Kairos's expression darkened. Enough. He stepped forward, cracking his neck. You are an aberration, Lyric. A mistake. Kaelor should have put you down when he had the chance. Lyric's fur bristled slightly, but his voice remained calm. I was never a mistake. Kairos exhaled sharply. No, but you will be a memory. And then he moved. John barely had time to react before Kairos lunged, closing the distance between him and Lyric in the blink of an eye. Lyric met him head-on, their bodies colliding with a force that shook the ground beneath them. The two wolves locked together, claws flashing, teeth bared in a savage, brutal dance. John focused on the mercs. He whirled out of cover, firing two quick shots. One caught a merc in the shoulder, the other hit center mass. The man crumpled, his rifle skidding across the ground. The second merc turned on him, but John was already moving. He ducked low, grabbing a rusted pipe from the ground, and swung hard, cracking it across the man's helmet. The impact sent him sprawling. John turned back just in time to see Kairos slam Lyric into the ground. The black wolf's teeth sank into Lyric's shoulder, drawing a sharp snarl of pain. Lyric twisted, using his momentum to throw Kairos off, but blood was already staining his white fur. John didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed the fallen merc's rifle, aiming without hesitation, and fired. The shot hit Kairos in the side, sending him staggering. Lyric didn't waste the opening. He lunged forward, his jaws closing around Kairos's throat. For a moment, everything was still. Kairos let out a strangled growl, his golden eyes flashing in shock. Then, slowly, his body went limp. Lyric held his grip for another breath, then another. Finally, he released. Kairos collapsed. The black wolf's body lay still on the cold metal ground. John exhaled, lowering his weapon. Lyric stepped back, his breathing ragged, blood staining his fur. He didn't take his eyes off Kairos's unmoving form. John swallowed. It's over. Lyric was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath. Yes, he murmured. It is. John looked at him, at the wolf who had defied fate, defied death, defied everything that was meant to destroy him. "Come on," John said quietly. "Let's get the hell out of here." Lyric turned his silver eyes toward him, and then, despite the blood, despite the pain, despite everything, he smiled. "Lead the way," he said. And together they walked into the unknown. The silence after a battle was always the loudest thing in the world. John could still hear his own pulse hammering in his ears, his fingers twitching slightly around the rifle he no longer needed. The station's shipyard was eerily still, the air thick with the scent of burned plasma, rusted metal, and blood. Kairos lay motionless on the cold floor, his once mighty form reduced to nothing more than another corpse in the long, unending list of things John had survived. But it was Lyric that held John's focus. The white wolf stood above his fallen kin, his chest heaving, his silver eyes distant. Blood matted his fur, some of it his, some of it Kairos's. His body was tense, shoulders coiled tight, but there was no triumph in his posture, no satisfaction in his expression. John knew that feeling. Killing wasn't victory. It was just another weight to carry. "Lyric," John called, voice low but firm. The wolf didn't respond. He just kept staring at Kairos's lifeless form, unmoving. John took a careful step forward. "It was him or you," he said, keeping his tone steady. "You didn't have a choice." Lyric let out a breath. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even acknowledgement. It was just exhaustion. "He was my brother," Lyric murmured finally. John exhaled slowly. "Yeah, that part he understood too." "He wasn't your family," John said after a moment. "Family doesn't leave you to die, doesn't try to put you down like you don't matter." He hesitated. "Kairos made his choice. You just made yours." Lyric's ears flicked slightly, but he didn't speak right away. He was processing it, and John knew better than to rush him. The wolf finally looked at him, his silver eyes clouded with something unreadable. "And what choice was that?" John gestured around them. "To survive." Lyric let that hang in the air between them. Then finally he nodded. John sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, we need to get moving before more of his people show up looking for revenge." Lyric gave one last glance at Kairos, then turned away from the body without another word. Neither of them looked back. The ship they found was a rusted, half-functional smuggler's vessel, abandoned in the far corner of the dock. It had been stripped down, missing several key systems, but the engine still hummed when John ran a quick diagnostics check. "She'll fly," John muttered, barely believing it himself. Lyric sat near the entrance ramp, licking the wounds along his forearm with slow, precise movements. "How do you always manage to find the most questionable transportation?" John grinned. "It's a skill." The wolf huffed, clearly unamused. John climbed into the pilot's seat, pressing a few manual overrides until the ship's control panel flickered to life. The engines let out a low whine, struggling against years of neglect, but eventually stabilized. They were leaving. John didn't know where they were going, but that part didn't really matter. He turned in his seat, glancing back at Lyric. The wolf sat tall, his silver eyes scanning the cockpit, assessing their next move before it had even begun. "You got anywhere in mind?" John asked. Lyric exhaled. "Thoughtful." "Somewhere quiet," John snorted. "Not sure we're built for quiet, partner." Lyric's lips twitched slightly. "No, I suppose we aren't." John stared at him for a long moment. He had been alone for so long, drifting through life, just another forgotten soldier on a station full of ghosts. And now he had something more. A wolf who had been engineered for diplomacy but chose war to stay free. A creature meant to be a servant but chose his own path. A friend. John leaned back, adjusting the ship's trajectory as the docking clamps released. The station fell away behind them, a distant memory swallowed by the endless black of space. The future stretched before them. Unknown, uncertain, but theirs. "All right, Lyric," John said, his grin lazy and confident. "Let's see where the stars take us." The wolf's silver eyes gleamed. "Lead the way." And with that, they vanished into the void, chasing a future neither of them had ever thought possible.